Hello, this is Christian coming to you with another knife review. This time on the table it's a zero tolerance 562 in carbon fiber. Now once again, like the one I did before, like the Chavez 229 Redención, this particular knife I had for a very long time, and it is probably also one of those knives that will never leave my collection. It's a 20 CV plate, and I think it comes in at around about 3.5, 3.6 inches in plate length. It is a Hinderer Design that I believe was licensed by Zero Tolerance, and an absolute classic for that. So this particular so-called slicer grind is very particular to Hinderer knives, and to this particular version of Zero Tolerance's interpretation of the Hinderer design, if you like. Now on this side, the knife looks relatively plain, if you wanna say that. Personally, those finger indentations, they give absolutely awesome ergonomics. So this knife really melts into your hand. It is absolutely spectacular in terms of this particular holding position. This is second to none for my hands, at least. In many other respects, on the other side, and perhaps that also makes that knife a little bit more interesting, it's quite busy on the other side. Very technical, tooly looking, as far as the other side is concerned. And then you can see the pocket clip is probably due for a replacement, so that has seen an awful lot of use. In terms of carrying it, it's been a pleasure to carry. So as compared to the knife that I would probably stack up against it, next to it, that I like just the same, or perhaps even a little bit more, the Chavez 229, you can see they're similar in size, but if you put them on their backs, you can perhaps make out the Chavez is a fair bit thicker. It's a quite a bit bulkier in terms of thickness if you compare them side by side. So the 562 is a fair bit more pocket friendly, and not an issue at all, even in tighter pants. And I have to say, little details. These days perhaps we see that frame lock stop integrated into your lock bar insert over here. I personally think it's a nice detail. It kind of adds to the technical nature of it. Also, your pivot screw, it has a really technical look to it. So this particular one, by the way, has been laser engraved on the titanium side with a CO2 plastic laser, which has a nice effect. It actually doesn't etch into the material, it just discolors it, so it's a little bit like heat anodizing. So something to consider if you know somebody perhaps with a CO2 laser. I've been doing that to some of my keepers. It's a really neat way to get an engraving, because it really doesn't etch the surface on the titanium. It's just a discoloration, and personally I'm a great fan of personalizing knives this way, just on the side. As far as action is concerned, that always has been a little bit a point of contemplation. So overall this is a great action. What I never liked about the 562 is the fact that your flipper tab just comes in the way. So you disengage this knife and you get to this point there, and from then on you're kind of in an arrested position, and you really have to give it a little bit of a tug at the top, and then it's buttery smooth. Well, I have to be fair, it is now. It hasn't been from the factory. I put taco bearings in, which is a double row skiff bearing, and that made a huge difference to the action of this particular knife. If you grab it really at the furthest end of the lock bar and open it up, then it closes directly quite nicely. So that's not an issue there. But as far as action is concerned, the flipper tab, oh, look here, there I had a little bite from it, just doing that. It is sharp. So yeah, the action is actually quite beautiful. Let me just put something over that one. I personally tend, because I've been using this knife and the Redenstion on and off, I got used to opening that up on its actual stop pins. So for me, the flipper tab is absolutely unnecessary. I'll just use those little stop pins over there to actually open the knife, which is my preferred method. And to tell you the truth, I like companies who spend a little bit more time designing their flipper tabs. So if for instance you look at the Civivi Elementum and you compare the size of the flipper tab, let's say, to the Elementum, you see that with the ZT 562 you have quite a bit of a pocket poker there, and it just looks... It ruins the aesthetics of the knife a little bit, I find. Whereas, and when you open it, it also comes a little bit in the way. You can't really get your index finger in front of it. That's not really a comfortable or useful position in this particular case. So you kind of have it sitting there, and it perhaps protects your hand, but I really don't want it to be there. So I might at a later stage perhaps do a flipper delete on this particular knife. If you look at this Elementum by comparison, you can see how unobtrusive this flipper tab becomes in the deployed position, and how useful it is if it's just positioned at the right angle. And that makes a big difference to me as far as designing a flipper tab is concerned. Also, you take the giant mouse Jutland for comparison, and you look how tiny a flipper tab can be while still being really useful. So that just as a side note, perhaps times have progressed, and we see that, well, today people try to do it a little bit more refined, whereas this particular knife model is quite a bit older, and at the time a pronounced flipper tab was perhaps an important thing, so people could recognize it as a flipper. I don't know, but certainly, yeah, that being the one gripe I have with this knife in particular. Other than that, I modified it in terms of its actual angle. So it's a very steep 17-degree angle on this particular knife. Zero tolerance, I think, recommends not going below 23, 24 degrees. I didn't have an issue. I know not to abuse this knife in terms of putting too much side load on a relatively fine and refined tip and blade. 20 CV is more likely to chip than a lot of other knife steels. It holds its edge really, really nicely. So 20 CV and M390, they're pretty much similar. They're almost identical, in fact, as far as composition is concerned, and they perform, if they're hardened to the same hardness, they perform almost identical. So 20 CV at the time was an absolutely great knife steel. It still is. It's still very popular. It's one of the absolutely premium knives out there. Yeah, look, one keeper for sure. Once again, also one of those knives where I would have, at the time, would have liked to fork out a little bit more for the full titanium version, which I would have liked better. But I had a little bit of a hedgehog in my pocket every time I reached in. It stung, so I went for the slightly cheaper carbon fiber version, and I like it as well. It is it still looks great. It has worn in nicely, but on the other side, you look at the stone washed titanium, and you can see that even though this knife has been used a lot, there's not an awful lot of snail trails visible on this. So yeah, and this is also where my ring would ride. So this is ring position on this side of the scale, so you would expect to see a fair amount of snail trails, but the stone wash there works really, really well, and I would say, well, you know, stone washed on both sides really works for a hard use knife. I wouldn't necessarily say a milled finish or a bead plastered finish works as well. So full titanium knives always stone washed, in my personal opinion. Yeah, that's my my opinion on the 562. Brilliant action, albeit with a little bit of modification required in terms of bearings. After that, just awesome. Personally, I'm not too fond of that kind of two-step closing mechanism, and as you can see, if I'm trying to overcome it, it's quite easy if you have a well sharpened knife to actually bite yourself with that. So some would reason that perhaps is a reason why it's there in the first place, but I can promise you this is not necessarily the case. If you don't have to hold the knife that far back, then this part of the blade here would just end up on your nail, and you wouldn't cut yourself. That is, for instance, the case if you look at the Chavez or similar knives. So yeah, this is a knife that is really built for two-step closing, right? Something to keep in mind there. If you get it to operate smoothly, you can consider removing your flipper tab, because you can, with a little bit of practice and a little bit of fine-tuning of the action, you can actually use the stop pins as some studs. So yeah, that's my take on the Zero Tolerance 562 in carbon fiber. I hope you enjoyed that review. It's not the latest and greatest knife out there at the moment, but it is an all-time classic, and certainly still worth looking at. It's a great knife. Alright, you all have a good weekend. See ya. Bye.